Welcome to LeaderCast, episode 287.
Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
This is our third episode about missional leadership. In the first two episodes, episode 285 and 286, we talked about two aspects of missional leadership, and so we're diving into the third aspect today. And Tim, what is the third aspect of missional leadership?
Well, Sarah, that third aspect of missional leadership is know your mission field.
And this might seem obvious, but for many people, it is not something that has been tended to in the life and leadership of the church. So here's what I'll offer. Knowing your mission field isn't about reading a demographic report. Demographic reports can give us lots of good information, but you have to field test what the report says. Again, as we've said in the previous two episodes, knowing your mission field is about relationships. You can't build relationships by reading a demographic report. So you might say, Sarah, what is determining your mission field about? So one of the ways that we might talk about our mission field is deciding as Christ-centered leaders, here is the area that we're going to be focused on. Or here are the people that we're trying to share the love of God we know in Jesus with. You might say things like, we're focused on the people within a 5-mile radius to share God's love with them. We're focused on a specific county, or we're focused on a specific school district or a specific age group. You have to decide what makes sense for your local context. What doesn't work is not having a focus. That's probably been clear from episode 285, 286, and now we're going to say it again in episode 287. The geographic area that you focus on is your mission field, however you define that geographic area. And we will link to the 7 missional questions that can help you explore who are the people that are around you. So if we look back again, we've been talking about a 10-year period and the shifts that have been happening. 10 years ago, most churches were not focused on getting out of their buildings, understanding the context of their local community. I told you that I was trying to help people have that conversation, and I was getting the look of, why was I even talking about it? But if we're going to meet new people in 2023 and beyond, that's exactly what we have to do today. We should have been doing it all along, but as you've heard me say before, shooting on people doesn't serve anyone.
So Sarah, listening, as you're talking, I've got a couple of questions. And these questions come out of what people have said to me in the past when we talk about being focused. And that is, let's say that you do focus on a geographic area, 5-mile radius. Is that the only focus? We have people that drive farther away than that to come to our church. And we've got people who live in the next town, and we've got people that do this. Do we not care about them?
Of course we care about them, and no one is going to check your driver's license or any other ID saying, do you live within a 5-mile radius? You're missing the point when you do that. The focus is about helping to guide your ministries and to focus on a specific area. That does not exclude anyone.
So you've answered the question. What I'm thinking, and this is where we have to make a shift in our thinking, and that is, I had a professor in seminary that used to say, if you aim at nothing, you usually hit it. And so with the location of your church building, let's just say it that way, it's the church building is located there because once in its history, it was in the midst of people. Because of population shifts and the cultural shifts, the people who were once a part of your church maybe not necessarily live in the neighborhood or the city in which you're now focused. So that if we talk about our mission field, when we talk about our mission field, we're not talking about trying to put our arms around where everybody lives that attends the church. We've just gone back to the old way. We're talking about how we focus on a group of people in a geographic area. And the focus on the people isn't to make them do something, whatever. It's go back and listen to the last episode where you're going to develop the relationships, where you're going to allow God to use you to be a loving, receiving person to people in a certain geographic area. That's really what we're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. Here is an illustration. I mentioned it in episode 285 when I was facilitating Awaken the City with teams of people. The first thing that we would do on Sunday night when teams came into the city was a prayer walk. And the prayer walk was intended to be an introduction to the local context, to the mission field that we were working in. We didn't do that prayer walk in all of the communities that people were coming from to serve. We did that prayer walk within maybe a 5-block radius around that church, because that was our mission field. That was where we were engaged in ministry. So think about, the easiest way for me to think about it is a geographic area, but I know people that have focused on an age demographic. So, let's say you're focusing on elementary age children, then what's going to be a natural connection point? The elementary school and families who have children at the elementary school, right? So how are you building relationships with people that are in those places? Again, this is not about how are we going to get them into the doors. If that is your focus, you are not being missional. If what you are trying to do is get them to show up on Sunday, even that language, get people to show up on Sunday morning for worship, you have missed the point of missional leadership. That may happen. It can happen, and it does happen. But that is not your focus. Your focus is on meeting people where they are at. And to be focused, we define a mission field. And we look at our local context to discern what makes sense for us. What are our assets? What are the needs? What are the relationships that we have? And again, we'll link to some questions that can help you to do that. But the question that I go back to that helps people articulate living missionally and to stay focused not only on the mission field, but on Jesus, is asking people, where have you seen Jesus in the past week? Where have you experienced God's presence in the last week? You've heard me ask those questions before, and I will not stop asking them. Because that is the question that helps us to stay focused on following Jesus and keeping God in the driver's seat so that we can build relationships in the mission field that God has sent us to.
Which is right out your front door. I think we have to keep reminding people that. There's another way in which we decide the mission field, and I think, Sarah, you can explain this better than I can. I'll try to tee it up for you. And that is, in some of our churches, and I'm going to say the churches that may have a little more money and maybe a little more affluent, can give money to certain projects or agencies in the city or the community in which they're located, but they may not have any relationship with those. They just give money. So one of the ways you may define your mission field is not by the groups of people that you give money to, but the groups, agencies, service organizations in which people are already participating in developing relationships. Can you tell us more about that?
I'm thinking two things. One, in the places where money has been the driving force of connection to missions, plural, and usually that is in other parts of our community, other parts of the world. There's a shift that has to take place. It's not that money is not needed. It is not that we don't want to facilitate, the gathering of those financial resources, because in some instances, that's the best thing that we can do is give money. A missionary needs to have, food for their family, and if we can help support, of course, that is a good thing. However, if you are seeking to transform people's lives, and I'm talking about your life and the people of the people's lives that are already connected, you need to be in relationship with others. And to do that, there needs to be a tension that exists. And so the best way that I know how to introduce that tension to people is to invite them to serve with people who often have life circumstances that are different from them. And we do that in relationship. That transformation is not going to emerge if we are doing things, again, nice and needed things like packing food boxes, packing, school bags, painting walls. Those things are all needed. They're not going to lead to transformation. And I can say that emphatically because this is where I did my doctoral research. I set out to try and figure out what makes a bigger difference. This was my silly question. Having a mission trip, having a one-time service opportunity, or having an ongoing small group doing something in service that might happen once a month or once every 6 weeks. And what I found, friends, is none of those things mattered. What mattered was that people had an opportunity to stop and reflect on what their experience was, to answer that question, where did you see Jesus? And that the ministry that they were engaged in, the service that they were engaged in, was with people. Those two things determined transformation. So when it comes to defining your mission field and where are you going to be engaged in ministry, the question to ask the people that you're in conversation with, some of the agencies that you might partner with, the places that you might connect with, is how can we be in relational ministry? How can we be helpful in serving with people? How can we come alongside the people that are being served by this organization to be of help? What is it that we can do to be helpful to the people that are here? And in the places that the answer is give us money, there are times that I have chosen to move on from that organization, and I have led people to move on because the relationship was essential. I didn't make some people happy in doing that, and I would do it all over again. And I would advise people to do it all over again. Because if we are going to be the body of Christ, and then Sarah's TED Talk will end, if we are going to be the body of Christ, we are about making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And we have to be thinking about that and focusing on that within the context that God has sent us.
So I've got something I want to add to that, but just before I do that, I'll set it all up as a transition. And that is, you exactly what you were talking about, but the transformation may be in you more than it'll be in the people you're serving.
And we cannot say that enough. You are never doing for or to people. This is about your relationship with Jesus. And yes, there will be opportunities that other people's lives will change. That's up to God. That's not up to you.
Right. And you can read all through Acts how people filled with the Holy Spirit made difference in other people's lives, but they first were transformed. and it's part of their transformation. And even Simon Peter had a transformational experience even after he's already been to the cross and he's been the resurrected Jesus. And he has a transformational experience when he says, God told me that he didn't create anybody profane. I mean, he continues to grow. Where I wanted to go with all that is that when I was a pastor of a church that was located in the city downtown, we actually decided that our mission field was just a neighborhood next to us that had a small school, had a park, and it was a lower income community. The people, and this is where I always got the question about, well, if we're just going to focus there, you don't care about the people that live in the suburbs. So that's the reason I asked that question early on. So this was our mission field. This is where we were going to do it. And part of what you've already said, Sarah, I had people who took it seriously. They did on prayer walks. They walked several blocks around that community, and their prayer was always, God, what would you have us do here that nobody else is doing? That was the prayer. And you've heard me say part of these stories already. We adopted the elementary school that was there, developed programs there that actually included a relationship of about 250 people in that church with all the students in that school. We can talk about that another time. But where I want to go with this is as we named that as our mission field, we built a habitat house a year. But when we named that mission field, we told Habitat, we'll build the house in this community. This is our mission field. They didn't necessarily like that. But when they realized that we were at that time putting $40,000 a year into building a house, they were saying, let us help you.
Right.
This is our mission field. As people developed relationships with children in the school and began to find out more about their families, they found out that one particular family, a couple of boys, slept on the floor. They didn't have beds. They slept on the floor. And they listened to the little boys tell the stories of watching the stars at night while they were sleeping. It's because the leak in the roof was so bad that they could see the sky. So I had people then saying, how can we be who we're supposed to be for these folks? And we started another ministry, the ministry in response to fixing a roof. And I think they didn't buy beds. I think with the little boys, they showed up on a couple of Saturdays and the boys helped build beds in the backyard. I don't think those little boys ever came to church, but the impact those men had, and these were particularly men at that point, the impact that experience had on those men and what those men had upon the people who gathered, they always had an audience to listen to how they were experiencing God's love by sharing with these kids. Right. And I'm sure you've heard me tell before, in that same mission field was a park that was a place for drugs and prostitution. And we had people that walk the park and say, God, how can we use this park? How do you want us to use this park? And they would meet people who were in the park, some of them other than the prostitutes and the drug dealers. And they made an alignment together, became allies, and they had a revival service in the park. The point of the revival service was not to get a whole group of people there, but to claim the park for Jesus. And one of the persons they developed an alliance with was an Hispanic pastor. And so our very first service there was in English and in Spanish. We didn't have any Spanish-speaking people at the church, but she needed to have some care and support, and so we did that. Bottom line is, eventually, the church, the people in the church who were in mission in that community, got the money from the city council because there was nobody in the community that they could give the money to, the park district. and revamped the park, and it became a place for soccer for 200 children at the school. That's not the point. The point is we decided we'd feed the children. And one of the Sunday school classes that always prayed the prayer, what do we need to do that nobody else is doing? And they said, well, we'll provide the hot dogs and whatever for the children. And the parents showed up with siblings who were hungry. And so they eventually were serving hot dogs and drinks to families. That became their ministry. There were sometimes they'd say, we had to buy more hot dogs. We bought 200 and we had to buy more and whatever. But their conversations were always around who they had conversation with, who they had met, how they were now going to work with another family.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about. That's the best illustration I have of how that's not just theory. That's the way it works. And that's part of it.
And it's a beautiful illustration, Tim, because what did you all do as leaders in the church? You defined your mission field. And then you invited people to be present and build relationships with people. The ministry emerged from there. You didn't set out saying, we're going to build beds, buy hot dogs, have a soccer team, do music. No, it was, this is our mission field. Okay, God, what you doing here? What's happening? And how do you need us to respond in the midst of that? That is what we are talking about and what we have been talking about over these 3 episodes, inviting you to focus in on being a missional leader. Beautiful illustration. Thank you for that.
So we started this podcast with you saying that you would post a link to the 7 missional questions. I think one of the things that would be helpful, I'm projecting now upon the people who are listening, that we just run through those questions if we have time for this podcast to do that.
Sure. I don't know that we need any commentary about these because we've already given you the commentary.
The first one is, and Sarah, you've mentioned this one several times already, is where have you seen God at work in the community this past week?
The second one is, what is the mission or the purpose of the church?
And the third one is what we've been talking about in this podcast. What's the mission field? What is our mission field? That's defining that mission field.
And Tim illustrated these next 2 beautifully in his story, and I was pointing to it in what I was sharing with you. The question is, what are the assets in our community?
And the next one is, what are the needs in our community? And you find out both of those not by looking in some kind of directory, but by talking to people.
And that's question number 6. What relationships exist with leaders in our community?
How do you collaborate, or can you collaborate with other churches in ministry?
And you don't have to hurry and write those down. We'll include it as a download so that you can grab those on the show notes page at transformingmission.org/287. Tim, are there any other final words of wisdom that you want to offer on this podcast? I don't think I've asked you that yet.
Sarah, I would really encourage people to look at the 7 missional questions. They cover the very things that you have led us through in terms of missional leadership, but especially this last episode. I think taking those 7 missional questions and being serious about them, and let's just say, let's do it for 12 months. And every time you meet, you're going through them. And you're sending people out. Do a Bible study on Luke 10 about being sent out 2 by 2. And then have people come back and report what they're learning, whether they're praying, whether they're talking to people. Get connected to the community again. And I don't mean that as an admonishment. I mean, that's who we are as faithful followers of Jesus, being connected to the people. So I don't know if those are words of wisdom or not, but that would be my challenge for the people listening today.
I'd call that a word of wisdom. Words of wisdom from Tim Bias. So over the past 3 episodes, we've offered 3 ways that you can focus on being a missional leader because of the shifts that we're all experiencing in our culture over the past 10 years that have been accelerated in the past 3 years. That shift has been happening for much longer than 10 years. Thanks for joining us for episode 287 of LeaderCast. Again, you can find show notes for this episode, including the 7 missional questions at transformingmission.org/287. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.